Yeah, I mean, based on some of the stuff you've been sending me, I'm pretty good time to actually do this chat. I know you and I did that video a few days ago, but even since then, you pulled up a couple good things that are important to talk about, I think.
What's going on tonight, everybody? Good to
Hey,
see
Walk
y'all.
of Fire.
Hear y'all.
Stop talking.
I'm excited to hear what you've been finding, MB.
Well, it's still cooking, but we got some definite stuff we can share and kind of lay down the groundwork. And it's also one of those things that you start looking at and you realize other people were already ahead of you and it just never got the acclamation that it should have. But hopefully we can at least do our part to make people bring it to the awareness that it deserves. And but the other thing is bringing in the context of things that we've learned recently. I think that's really important.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing how many, discoveries and things that you can find when you're digging that it's someone else has put together a lot of pieces, but now that you know more, then you can, add that to the bigger tapestry. And it gives it a whole new life and a whole new meaning. So just, of course, we want to, hat tip and give kudos to people who have done lots of the groundwork before us. But when you find something that connects to something new, make sure and keep pushing it out there.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started here. And for those that missed it today, Bongino had a nice shout out for Walk of Fire. It was good to see Walk of Fire being thrown out there.
It was nice to hear that. If Dan hears this, I appreciate it, Dan, as always.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and get started. I know there's a couple other chats going on right now, and maybe we'll get some of that spillover as that wraps up. So, a few days ago, MB and I did a chat on TDIP Hamilton 68 New Knowledge, and this is kind of like an add-on. So, as a quick summary, obviously we had Matt Taibbi out there, and he's been doing the legwork, really breaking the news on the Twitter front as far as Hamilton 68 goes, especially where Hamilton 68 through pretty suspect methodology had identified a few hundred accounts that they said were Russian actors or Russian bots or were part of this influence scheme. And as it turns out, I mean, based on Twitter's own analysis, that really doesn't seem to be the case. So, there's been a lot of discussion really back since 2016 where there's a few stories pushed out at least that the Russians had mounted this huge influence campaign. They had created thousands of Twitter bots to basically retweet certain items and really push out a bunch of disinformation into the public. And as it's starting to unfold, it's really unclear if there were any bots during 2016. And more, it really looks like the only thing that's really identifiable is this operation called Project Birmingham that Democrat operatives actually put together. And as a little bit of background context, there's this organization called New Knowledge. And New Knowledge was engaged by the Senate to kind of investigate these allegations of Russian influence. And they produced a report for the United States Senate. And while they were doing that and wrapping that up, during the 2017 special election in Alabama, they actually mounted a false flag operation. And that's been out there publicly now for a number of years. And New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, a few other places have some articles on it. And basically, they just created at least 20,000 Twitter bot accounts. There are some reasons to believe it might be higher than that. But based on some reporting that we have, and Margot Cleveland, I think, called this out a few days ago, where over one weekend, Roy Moore, who was the Republican candidate for Senate in the state of Alabama, in one weekend, he had 27,000 followers, and by the end of the weekend, he had 47,000. And the 20,000 accounts were said to be, Russian in origin, and they used that as a smear campaign against him. This big operation where they said, he's in bed with the Russians. The Russians are supporting him. He's a stooge for Vladimir Putin. And it was not true. That was an operation being done by New Knowledge operatives. And what's really sinister about this, and MB, kind of refound or found sort of this connection, it's that we kind of knew this, and I think there was another user that tweeted it out even after our video, in which it's the same people, the New Knowledge and the Hamilton 68 group. They're really the same people. There's actually a connection between the dashboards that they were creating. So with the same people, you have Hamilton 68 going to the United States Senate, and they're saying, "Hey, Roy Moore, the Russians, created tens of thousands of accounts, and you got to look at Roy Moore in Alabama," when in reality, it was their friends at New Knowledge that were creating the accounts. And so you have a situation where the Democrat operatives did a false flag operation. They created tens of thousands of Twitter bot accounts, and then they went to the United States Senate and they told them, "Hey, these are all these Russian Twitter bots, and there's this huge influence campaign." So that's the essence of it. And MB's been doing some really good research over the last few days. So MB, if you want to jump in and clean up what I might have missed, or maybe add on from your research.
Sure. And I'm going to have to throw out a lot of different names real quick and some organizations just to give some context. But I think it's important because these names always seem to come back around and connect with each other. So Reid Hoffman is the billionaire that was one of the founders of LinkedIn. And sometime around 2016, he decided to put a lot of money into politics. And he did that by partnering with a guy named Dmitry Melhorn in a bunch of different, basically you'd call it dark money type organizations, because they're things where they're not necessarily showing up with reports that you can know where the money's coming from, where it's going. And a lot of people have been complaining about that on both sides of the aisle for a long time. And this is definitely a big push in that realm. He started something called News for Democracy, something called Acronym, something called Alloy. This stuff was all over the place, but you would never know about it because nobody's name's on it. But it all came from Reid Hoffman, and one of the groups that he also started was called Investing in Us, and that was where Mikey Dixon, who was a Obama era tech guy that helped set up the Obamacare website, he got money for his organization called American Engagement Technologies. And again, I'm sorry for all these different names and things, but they are kind of important. So American Engagement Technologies, we're talking 2017 here, and there's a special election coming up in the state of Alabama for the senator for Jeff Sessions' seat, and kind of the whole country is watching it. Now, this is where Project Birmingham takes off. American Engagement Technology is definitely involved. New Knowledge was hired by American Engagement, I'm going to call it AET. And we don't know exactly where one starts and the other begins. There's a lot of gray area here that no one has gotten the answers to. So 2017, these guys make this Russian bot system to basically frame the Republican candidate. They pretty much get away with it. Nothing really comes. It's never really discovered until about a year later, when all of a sudden 3 different news organizations, at least the New York Times, the Washington Post, and BuzzFeed, and possibly others, they all posted stories about this within a couple of weeks of each other. The first one was New York Times, and it was Scott Shane. Now, BuzzFeed came out a couple weeks later and said, "Oh, by the way, Scott Shane knew about this 2 months before he published anything." In late 2000, I'm sorry, right now we're talking about 2018. So Shane was at a meeting with Mikey Dickinson and some other people. It was a small meeting. There were apparently 13 attendees. This is in September. And he was invited to be a speaker. And Mikey Dixon comes up with someone from Investing in Us called Sarah Hudson. And they bring out this report on Project Birmingham and explain the entire thing. And according to BuzzFeed's interview of Shane, he said, it was shocking. I had to sign an NDA, so I could never publish any of this. I couldn't talk about it, but I found it really disconcerting that they would be doing this and they'd be talking about it openly. And I'll put up the BuzzFeed article if I haven't already, and you guys can read it for yourselves. It's really pretty interesting. But Shane didn't publish anything until this report was leaked to both the New York Times, the full version of this report, the Washington Post, and to BuzzFeed. So it's out there. Someone within that organization, assumedly, has put out this, I think it's a 12-page report, literally bragging about how effective Project Birmingham was and how great it did. Now, apparently they were only allowed by agreement with whoever leaked it to publish the first half of it. So no one has the second half. No, it's not public what the full report is. We've only seen the first 6 pages. And one of the reasons was the person said they wanted it for anonymity. They thought that the second half might reveal who they were, but also that they felt like it made it look like Project Birmingham was too effective. Like it was bragging so much that it did all these great things. And apparently all the, these liberal news outlets bought that and said, well, they kind of ran with it and said, well, this was not that big a deal. This was, a lot of bragging on this program that didn't have that big of effect. And they really just were spoon-fed everything that they could do to play this down. They call it a small experiment, and it wasn't, definitely didn't have it enough of effect to flip the election over. But that's not what the report said at all. The report said the opposite. So the question becomes, did the person who leaked this, was this done as a limited hangout because they, for some reason, knew that this was going to come out at some point and they wanted to, establish an alibi, basically, or level the playing field so that when it did come out, they would already have the party line of, oh, it was a small thing. Yeah, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it, but it wasn't a big deal. Well, it was a big deal just in the fact that they either did what they accused the Russians of doing, or perhaps, who knows, maybe this wasn't the first time this was done. So we don't really know. But so those were the big finds, and those came out. Dan Cohen at Gray, the Gray Zone. I'm sorry. He uncovered most of this at the time, but it kind of flew by underneath the radar. And that was long before everything we learned about Hamilton 68. So we know that New Knowledge was basically one of the founders of Hamilton 68. And we know that New Knowledge was somehow wrapped up in Project Birmingham and was involved for sure. So AET with Mickey Dickinson is pointing fingers at New Knowledge. New Knowledge is saying, we didn't do it. They're pointing fingers back and said, this is not our kind of report. And so we don't know who did what. We don't know who wrote the report. We don't know who leaked the report. The one thing we do know is that Mickey Dickinson, through a meeting, and made everyone there sign a non-disclosure agreement and read that report and bragged on it. So that's something that we know for a fact, and we know that Mickey Dickinson is somebody that should be talked to find out, where did he get this report? What did he know? If you go back and look at these articles in the New York Times and Washington Post, they interviewed all these people, but they just let them off the hook. They just let them give their party line, and they didn't. They certainly didn't pin them down and say, well, how did you get this? Where did it come from? Simple questions that any journalist should ask. So it's really, if you read all three, the BuzzFeed one's by far the most scathing, or at least, interested in asking some tough questions. But the fact that this all kind of just got, blew by the wayside is really shocking to me. Anyway, I talked enough for a minute, so jump back.
Yeah, no, that was a good summary. And, with Sarah Hudson being a former Department of Justice official, also being involved in this scheme in some ways, it's pretty interesting to see all these Obama officials being around these political schemes for, the Democrats here. And there's a few points I wanted to pile on. So back when these stories came out, and this is late 2018, where they're reporting on stuff that they're doing the prior year in 2017, it didn't get a lot of pickup, right? We have it from the New York Times, we have it from the Washington Post, but I don't remember it being picked up on Fox News or anything. And part of the reason is, they sort of couched it as limited to the Alabama Senate race, and nobody really wanted to go to bat for Roy Moore. But in the larger context, what we seem to be looking at now is a situation where these researchers from New Knowledge were engaged by the United States Senate to produce a report on the Internet Research Agency. And they kept telling the Senate, like, hey, there's all these Russian bots. There's all these Russian bots. You gotta look at this. And when they were asked to produce evidence, they repeatedly couldn't produce any evidence, or they would refuse to turn over this list of accounts. They were keeping that closely held because they knew everything would collapse if they actually turned over this information. So in the midst of all this, in late 2017, where even Twitter's pushing back and saying, like, no, we can't find anything that supports these allegations that you're pushing, that's when they decide that they're going to do this false flag operation, and they're going to create 20,000 Russian Twitter bots, and then all of a sudden they can go to the Senate and substantiate these allegations they've been putting out there just to build this narrative. And you have to ask why they would build a narrative like that. What was so important to them about getting that narrative out there? Because within months of this, that's when we get a little bit more context and detail on what the Russians supposedly did during 2016. That's what it seems like to me, because if you actually go back and you look at some of these supposed or alleged Internet Research Agency activities during 2016, nothing really makes sense. I mean, if you look at the Facebook ad spending, the highest month of spending on ads by what is supposedly the IRA was actually May 2016. It's not October, which you would sort of expect as it leads into the election. If it was supposed to be this big influence campaign, that's the month you would expect to be the highest. So there's a lot of oddities in the broader context, and then to have the same group, right, associated that's doing this report for the Senate goes on, and they're the ones that create these Russian Twitter bots. You just have to ask, like, that just doesn't make sense to go from being the person reporting on it to being the person doing it. And that just creates so many more questions for 2016. But there's a couple other points we have to keep in mind, because you referenced Mikey Dickerson, who is an Obama official, and he's obviously implicated in this false flag operation and many public reports. But at this exact same time, Mikey Dickerson, who is also a former Fusion GPS subcontractor, by the way, Mikey Dickerson at the same time was also engaged by the United States Senate in looking at the Alpha Bank allegations. During this exact same time, when he's going out there and he's creating 20,000 Russian Twitter bots, he's actually engaged, and he's supposedly reporting on the secret communications channel between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. There's a red flag right there. And then, we have another name to throw out there, Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones, he ran an organization called TDIP, the Democracy Integrity Project, and that is just a straight fundraising arm, really, for Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, and as it turns out, New Knowledge. Now, if you go to the 990 forms for TDIP, New Knowledge is actually listed as Popley. They did a bunch of name changes, but they're actually, one of the significant funders of these operations comes from Daniel Jones. And of course, John Podesta is involved in fundraising for Daniel Jones. But, circling back to the point we just made, Alpha Bank. So at this exact same time that they're creating these fake Russian Twitter bots, at least through this organization that he's funding, Daniel Jones is heading up that investigation for the Senate into the Alpha Bank allegations. And there's another question for Daniel Jones and this entire group. So there's a lot of concerns there for me. And then I think you referenced, there's 13 individuals, and all of them signed non-disclosure agreements. But I've also seen in public reporting where this group was largely described as tech people. They're cyber people, cyber researchers. And that, the logical question is, are we going to have any familiarity with any other meeting participants that were at this meeting? And I wouldn't be surprised if we do know a couple names that were at this meeting. So I think those are the main points I wanted to hit for now. MB or Walkfire, if you want to continue.
Let me add one more name, because I find it very interesting. And it's a woman named Renee DiResta. And she was the author of both of the U.S. Senate Intel Committee findings on the Russian interference in the election. she worked for both AET for a short time and then New Knowledge. She'd been working with Jonathan Morgan for a while, apparently. So we're talking about the bot thing was happening in 2017. That election happened in December because it was a special election. She is at that time already apparently working with via New Knowledge, the Senate committee, the Intelligence Committee, and I'm gonna retweet this real quick because I think it's important. So on November 1st, 2017, DeResta tweets, Senate Intel Committee repeatedly bring up information warfare, yes, blah, blah, blah. Also, shout out to Hamilton 68. So this is exactly right when she either had been working with New Knowledge on Project Birmingham or still was. We don't know because she has not been real clear about when she stopped working with AET. But Dan Cohen seemed to think that she was actually running Project Birmingham at some point. He has that in his article. I don't know if that's true, but she seemed to be definitely something of a wheel here. And she wrote her name on the Intel Committee conclusions. It's absolutely crazy.
It is crazy, and in the broader context, I mean, and the backdrop of this is the Internet Research Agency, and they were indicted by Mueller for alleged activities. And there's sort of this disinformation campaign out there where, in the public reporting and some of the press reports, they're talking about Russian bots. And obviously, you have Hamilton 68 and Democrat operatives out there like Clint Watts who are talking about Russian Twitter bots. But in the indictment of the Internet Research Agency, there is no mention of Russian Twitter bots. All they really flag are a few prominent, they say, Russian accounts or influencers that have a number of followers that happen to retweet some Russian stuff. I mean, that's the essence of it. And that was sort of laughed out of the courtroom a number of years ago now. But it's extremely alarming to see the same actors and, try not to be like conspiracy, like nut jobs or whatever, but like, how can you not have the specter of conspiracy in your mind when, these same individuals are the one that are behind the whole scheme? And, I circle back to the question I posed earlier. Why would they do this? I mean, I don't think they were really interested in the Alabama race. I mean, yeah, they wanted to win. Yeah, they wanted to dirty up Roy Moore, but they really wanted to give this evidence to the Senate. And why? Were they trying to give Congress and Senate justification for an impeachment? That's what I sort of suspect. They wanted to continue getting enough dirt on Trump, and they just kind of hoped there would be something there where they could, this might be the tipping point for an impeachment. That's what I sort of suspect. MB or Walkfire, you haven't spoke yet. You have any thoughts?
Well, I'll jump in real quick too
Sure.
on kind of the overall goal, as it seems to me. As we get further and further into this dystopia, fighting disinformation with the government supporting social media and private companies and censorship, and well, how can we have a democracy if we have disinformation out there? I've mentioned before about how Trump came in 2016 and really knocked the legs out of the quote fake news narrative that had been being slowly injected into our national discourse for several years leading up to 2016. And again, I'm not trying to go conspiracy as much as just human nature, political nature, however you want to say it. The first thing that totalitarian regimes do is control the means of communication. That's why in war, especially before the internet, you go into another country, you take over their radio stations, you grab those so that you can control the narrative, the communication. And that's what we've been seeing for years now with fake news. And that was scared so many people with Trump as he came in and just shone a light on it and said, wait a minute, you guys are the fake news. And that became a right-wing talking point as opposed to a left-wing talking point. So what do? They just shifted the narrative now that, oh, it's not fake news, it's disinformation that we're fighting. It's misinformation that we're fighting. And it doesn't take a conspiracy, it just takes like-minded people all focused on the same thing. How do we shut down dissenting voices that stray too far from the approved narrative? And all this stuff with bots and censorship and everything, we're starting to see more and more how formalized it's becoming with this partnership between the federal government and private companies to push unwanted conversations out of the public discourse. And that's where I see a lot of this Hamilton 68, Project Birmingham, all of it, Russian bots, the Internet Research Agency. It's all about giving them cover to crack down and stamp out any of these dissenting opinions or voices that they don't like. You think back to the founders and the First Amendment, and what were they trying to do with the First Amendment? It wasn't that they were scared that the government would pass a law saying you cannot criticize the president. It was for this sort of stuff. It was saying, no, the government can't come in and tell you what is true and what is false, what is good information and what is misinformation. That was the entire purpose of the First Amendment. And to watch it slowly get turned on its head to say, oh, well, the only way to protect democracy is by stamping out anyone that doesn't agree with us, it's scary, it's flabbergasting, it's all of that. So, seeing how they play both sides. Well, let's amp up, fake Russian bots, and then on the other side say, see, look, here's all these Russian bots. And what happens? Within a couple of years, we have, the intelligence community partnering with Twitter and Facebook and Google and everyone else to say, well, this is how we save the country is by just stamping out any sort of voices that we don't like. And it's really scary to think how much information and just communication we have missed out on or not been able to see because it's been stamped. The accounts that got banned or anything like that, it's all the rest of us that self-censored and said, well, I'm not going to say anything about X because I'm going to get banned if I do that. So, you know what? I'll talk around it, or I'll, talk about it offline, but not online. And it's crazy just how much they manipulate, how we interact with each other online now. And I think that's a big part of all this that's happening.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm thankful that they didn't deem like our Russiagate stuff as disinformation, because we all could have been banned. And I think, we probably were closer to that than we might acknowledge or we might know about, because, all the narratives have been set. I mean, you still see it. If you go to left-wing accounts today, they're pointing to the Senate Intelligence Committee report, they're pointing to the Mueller report, and all that has been totally debunked. I mean, there's just no value in those reports at all. It's just a total waste of time. Whatever they did is almost completely worthless. But as it relates, I mean, circling back to this Project Birmingham, just the fact that you have Mikey Dickerson and Daniel Jones, and we don't know the full extent of Daniel Jones's involvement in Project Birmingham beyond the fact that he funded them. So you would think he would have to know a substantial amount about what they were doing, or he would have to have gotten some type of summary. You'd have to ask him, obviously. But just the fact that all of a sudden these two individuals are tied to Project Birmingham, and at the same time they were investigating the Alpha Bank allegations for the Senate, is such a red flag and you just have to question all the different information streams that were flowing in, of course, to the Senate, and we in the broader context, as we've talked about all the time, whether it's FBI or CIA or State Department, and all the different information flows. I mean, this is sort of a signature of Russiagate, where when something is garbage, you can almost identify it by the amount of information flows. If it seems like a coordinated campaign, it's probably garbage. I mean, that's sort of the takeaway. And if it seems like it is coordinated, it probably is coordinated, right? And nothing about the timing of anything that happens in Rushgate seems to be a coincidence. It seems to be a concerted effort on their part. And the more you look at different events, not even Project Birmingham and Alpha Bank, I mean, you can almost pick up that as a signature and look at a little bit of everything, I think. I don't know, Walkerfire or MB, if you guys have anything else, go ahead. Otherwise, I might open this up for questions if anybody has something.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that the the takeaway for me is that this stuff is happening simultaneously, literally simultaneously. That you have the Senate committee and New Knowledge is in there. Their people are running the show. I still don't understand exactly how that worked out. They sort of hijacked the whole thing. And simultaneously, Project Birmingham is happening. Like it's unbelievable that the same people are running a false flag operation that they admitted to. This is not, they admitted to it. They said, yeah, we did it, and it was probably a bad idea. It was no big deal though. And at the same time, they're the ones that are basically running the show in the U.S. Intelligence Committee. For God's sake, it's unbelievable that this isn't a bigger story and a bigger deal. It is a big, and I think that I hope that Congress can take another look at this and go, look, we need to find out what is in the rest of that report that that has not seen the light of day. We need to find out who was at that meeting. We need to really get to the bottom of this and find out if people that were working for the Senate were also involved in a false flag operation and a Senate operation at the same time. That's a huge deal. So, I really hope that this thing comes back to some prominence and gets some legs, because this is it's a big deal. That's all I could say.
Yeah.
Well, and as Undead said, I think you really hit a good point of no one wanted to come in and defend Moore on this. It's like, okay, yeah, he was kind of a kook, and they picked the perfect race to do it. And I can almost picture them, thinking about it, saying, hey, this race doesn't matter because the Republican's not going to win anyway, or shouldn't win anyway, or he's kooky, or however they want to say it. Like even if this makes a difference, it's not going to make a real difference because the Democrat's going to win anyway. And even when we come out and say that we did this, no one's going to want to come in and defend the losing candidate, which is exactly correct. And so even on the right, when it came out, we kind of saw it. This is ridiculous. This is horrible. But what do we want to do? Do we want to have a new election, for this guy? And it was masterfully done. And I hate saying that about the other side, but that's where they, kick us in the ass every time. Is they know how to manipulate and play the game. And unfortunately, it is two separate rules. If the right came in and tried to do the same thing, of course, they would all go to jail. So the way that they play it, they're always, a couple steps ahead. They've got this laid down so that, whatever shenanigans happen in 2024, Republicans are still going to be trying to catch up and do the same stuff as 2020 and 2022. Oh, it's about, ballots, not votes, or whatever, our talking point is these days. And they're already moving on to the next phase. And so we're constantly playing catch up, and, hopefully, with the new Republican majority in the House, they can come back and look at this stuff and say, wait a minute, how do we stop this stuff from happening again, and not disinformation out? It's how do we stop letting this these disinformation warriors actually control the narrative and control actual outcomes like they have.
Well, and I think you make a good point. I mean, it sort of taps into the frustration that we all have about John Durham and the, you know, the years that have passed. I mean, we're talking about the 2016 and 2017 and 2018 period. We're years past that now, obviously, and the Democrats have moved on to other things. You know, I I sincerely believe there is a conspiracy here, and if we get John Durham's report, if we get Congress on board to issue subpoenas and go after this, they would find crimes that surpass Watergate easily. I think we're well beyond anything that happened in Watergate. I think the cover up is probably 10 times the size of Russiagate, and the Russiagate is massive. So there's so many different phases to this, whether it's Alpha Bank and Project Birmingham to bolster this narrative, and we have questions about the DNZ hack, and it's like, why would they do all this to make the Russian efforts seem worse than they actually were? And the only reason you do that is if there's other elements of it that are also false. And that, that's obviously a rabbit hole. And it's like, I don't know if John Durham's going to bring charges, but I know his report's going to be damning because the publicly available information is damning. I mean, it's irrefutable at this point that the Mueller report, the Senate report, they're garbage. You can't rely on them. It's not just that there wasn't collusion between Trump and Russia. There's real questions about whether Russia really did anything substantively to try to influence the investigation. I mean, you talk about this big, hack and influence campaign. It's just been crumbling every step of the way. I mean, it's really, really unclear just how much Russia was actually doing. Maybe they bought, $2,000 or $3,000 of ads or whatever, but this big sweeping campaign that was fed to us for years that people still believe is true, it's not true. It can't be true because every element of it has been debunked. So, one of the things that really bothers me, and MB mentioned this earlier, Scott Shane. So this is the New York Times reporter. He's the one that broke the story. So he's the New York Times reporter. He broke the story about Project Birmingham. But as MB referenced, he was at this meeting. And how bizarre is it to have a New York Times reporter, and what kind of, you have to have some stones on you to invite a reporter from the New York Times to this meeting where you talk about a false flag operation, especially with everything that's going on. And this Scott Shane is the guy that won the Pulitzer as part of New York Times' coverage of the whole Russiagate saga. And you have this guy sitting there, and you're like, yeah, we did this false flag operation. Look at it. It was really, really effective. And so, yeah, he broke the story a couple months later. I guess he violated a non-disclosure agreement. But it's just insane to me that there was no follow-up, right? And I hate to lay into Scott because he is the one that broke the story. But it's like, how do you not follow up with this? Before you retire, before you hang up your stirrups or whatever, how do you not dig into this further? How do you not push out that report that apparently, is floating out there? How do you not have this, I just don't understand it. I don't understand how a group can invite a reporter there or have a reporter there and think it's okay to outline a false flag operation. And I think somebody's got to answer questions, and it's insane to me.
Well, I agree 100% that the media angle of this is just as big of a scandal. And Shane didn't break his NDA. Everything he talked about, he said it was around the NDA. So there's still stuff. There's still stuff that he did not disclose that happened at that meeting. And he still has access to that full report, assumedly, and he has not put it out. And I read listened to a podcast that somebody interviewed Scott Shane a couple of years ago and asked him some actually pretty tough questions about, well, this Project Birmingham is a serious deal. And he really was just going by their company line that, well, they say that it was actually just an experiment and it was small scale and blah, blah, blah. And the guy was like, well, if you're running an experiment and on hijacking airplanes. Do you go hijack an airplane? I mean, that's what they did. And he didn't have a good answer for that. It's like, that would have been my first question is you're if it's not a crime, it should be a crime, and you're doing it to find out how it's done. That's crazy.
I mean, once you establish that Clinton had paid for the dossier in October 2017, and everything had already been falling apart. I mean, even if Scott Shane didn't have inside information to the progress in the Mueller investigation, there were clearly signs out there that there were some issues. So in the context of him sort of getting the heads up on this into 2018, and how do you not really dig into, like, if you're at this meeting and you're saying he didn't violate a non-disclosure agreement and there's more information, like that's totally insane. Like I just can't wrap my head around that whole sequence of
I'll
events.
do one better on that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that he ever would have published that article if the report hadn't been leaked to 3 different outlets.
That's a good point.
I don't know that. Once he knew that it was out there, he knew he was going to have to write the article. I have no evidence that he would have done it otherwise.
Well, I think it's important to point out, and you pointed out earlier, he didn't mention that he was at this meeting. He omitted that fact from his report. That was actually something that BuzzFeed actually put out there. So, that's kind of unusual to omit something like that.
Yeah, he defended it as, oh, we do that kind of thing all the time. We'll, agree to not. Yeah, but that's not the same as going to a meeting where you're a speaker and it's 13 people and you sign an NDA. I don't know. I'm not an expert on media ethics, but that doesn't seem right. And not to disclose that he was there or that he had some prior knowledge and I mean, he's part of the story. That's why BuzzFeed's interviewing him, and he didn't disclose that. That's ridiculous.
I think it's unusual that he stopped where he did, where, in the context that was, 2017 and 2018, with all this reporting out there about this, big Russian influence campaign, how do you not prompt the question of, oh, these same people are the ones that are reporting on this for the United States Senate, and they're the ones doing it. Why didn't he put the question out there? Like, okay, did they have something to do with 2016 and some of the reporting that's out there? Or is this all, he seemingly just took their word for it. Like, oh yeah, we just did this, as a test of the Russian procedures or whatever. And how do you just accept that at face value and like, oh yeah, they were just testing this out? I have some real concerns with what had to be in his mind at the time. Let's see. If anybody wants to ask questions or anything, that's kind of why we did this on Spaces instead of another YouTube chat, was to have a little bit more back and forth and see if we could kind of brainstorm or think about some stuff. Anybody? I'll keep it open for a minute or two.
Don't be shy. I'm tired of talking. Please jump in. Oh, throw me a lifeline, folks.
Yeah, and if anybody was looking for like a more of a description, or they want to see like visual setups, MB and I did a discussion, so it's on our YouTube and Rumble channels, and we actually go through some of the news articles. So
yeah, I think there's some more stuff. This has all happened pretty fast, and we've been working on it pretty hard for a couple of days. Yeah. So I think when we have a chance to actually do a little bit more, that'll be a good platform, because we could show all the documents and walk everybody through it. Because it's one thing when people say a lot of things, but this stuff is rock solid documented. I mean, Reid Hoffman admitted that he funded this thing, so he didn't know anything about it. Jonathan Morgan said, "Oh yeah, that was us, but we didn't do it." All these people are on record, so you don't have to believe us. It's all out there.
And I think it's just important to keep this in mind as Matt Taibbi continues to report on Hamilton 68. And Matt Taibbi has certainly alluded to new knowledge in his reporting. So it's not like we're, adding on like a great deal. I mean, Taibbi knows all about new knowledge. And I think he's certainly included that in some of his reporting. But I think it's just important to keep this in mind in the context where we know there's a link between New Knowledge and Hamilton 68 now. So every time that Taibbi's out there putting out new information about Hamilton 68 or New Knowledge, just keeps this in mind. Like there's actually a Project Birmingham where these same individuals weren't just reporting on this for the Senate. They weren't just putting this out there in the public. They were the ones actually doing it. And then they fed their own work, their own false flag operation. They held it out there as legitimately, the product of Russian actions. So that's pretty insane. Mansour, I think you're connecting. I don't know if it's working or not, but if you wanted to speak, go ahead.
Hello?
We got you.
Okay. I was wondering if you guys had looked at or what you thought about like the labor.
Apologies, folks. We'll try to get this sorted out. There we go. Hey, Mansour.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, what's up, man?
Okay. I was like talking for I would just had a question. I was wondering if you guys had looked into or what you think about like the layer on top of these participant private companies. So by the layer above, I mean like I think Elon today tweeted out something about the Department of State Global Engagement Center. Or more specifically, like, remember all the Krebs stuff in the Department of Homeland Security? They have that thing called the Election Integrity Partnership. So some of those other groups that were working with the companies like Atlantic Council, the Digital Research Lab, all that stuff. You guys looked into some of that, because kind of echoing what I guess Walkafire was saying. Like the New Knowledge and the what do you call it? Which operation was it? The Roy Moore operation, like in 2017 was after Trump was already elected. So that doesn't affect like Trump's election, but that's like when they first started pushing all this disinformation. I don't know what you want to call it, tidal wave. Beginning in 2017, and also as Walkafire kind of said, we're like well beyond 2017 stuff now, right? As far as the 2020 election cycle goes, everything that they're doing now is so much more formalized. They're legitimate, quote unquote, departments of both Department of State and Department of Homeland Security now. That now we actually have detailed records on exactly who and what they were censoring in some of the 20 election run-up. Actual Twitter accounts, right-wing Twitter accounts. We have way better reporting on stuff that happened already in the 2020 election cycle. So I guess my question is, I don't think I've heard you speak about, that governmental layer above that is operating with all these same people. I forget the Durista lady. She went from New Knowledge right into I forget what she's running now. But so I just wondered what you guys thought about that, because they call it a so-called, I think they call whole of society, censorship network now, public and private cooperatives, and NGOs and think tanks that is all formalized now, and kind of like Walkafire was saying, it's almost to a degree almost overwhelming. Almost seems impossible at this point to untangle. So yeah, I just wonder what you guys thoughts were on the larger, especially because if you look into Atlantic Council, a lot of their goals are synced in transatlantic. Atlantic Council is London based, and they were deputized by Department of Homeland Security to censor Americans in our 2020 election. So we're like well beyond Project Birmingham to a scary degree. And just wondering any thoughts on that in general. Thanks.
Well, I think we're talking about a couple different things. So as it relates to Project Birmingham, I mean, you're talking about what was effectively a Clinton operation. I think that's sort of another tier of this campaign that was being waged against Trump. And, I don't know if you can directly tie it to Hillary Clinton, but it's certainly the same operatives. And they're conducting it really for the intention of dirtying up Trump and damaging his presidency and maybe getting him impeached. I don't know. But I think that's, as it relates to Project Birmingham, you're talking about probably something that was much more focused on Trump, and you're talking about more of probably a criminal activity. I would think at least it would be criminal to do this, and especially, you're giving information to the Senate and everything of that nature. But as it relates to more broader, disinformation boards and everything else that we've heard about over the last couple of years, I mean, I view that as different. So that's more of a government, bureaucracy where they're bringing in left-wing extremists, and obviously they're looking to ban in Twitter, ban accounts, ban people with different viewpoints, things of that nature, and obviously control the narrative. And I view that as a different and separate campaign. And yeah, MB, Walkfire, you guys want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually, Monster, that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I was looking at that. Mostly because I think if there's a crime here, it might have something to do with public money getting into one of these schemes. And Hamilton 68, we know, is funded by the Alliance for Securing Democracy. And anytime you hear the word democracy in one of these titles, you just know that something's wrong with them. And they were getting money from the German Marshall Fund, which definitely takes public money from the U.S. and other countries. So, I'm sure that there's some firewalls and things, but then again, money's fungible, and it probably is that some of this money has, filtered down. So your tax dollars at work, censoring the American people, that to me is like, that might be something that resonates really well with a lot of people that, hey, wait a minute, my tax dollars were done to set up this garbage.
Right. Like it was already reminding me of the stuff that you guys had looked at with DARPA and Jaffe and the DNS. Same thing. It was like the same kind of abuse of public-private partnerships, which do exist, for legitimate security concerns, but they all can be bent. But as far as like, if you're trying to focus on specific crimes, like, yeah, you might be able to get. I was just wondering, like what. It just seems like it's just a big ball out of control now.
Well, I'd agree as well. I think kind of even bigger picture, if you think about in the last 10 years how much the Republican Party has left big business. Republicans are about big business, and now, ironically, because of Trump, one of the biggest business owners out there, we're all anti-big business. But I think that comes down to, crony capitalism, how to formulate this in a good way. Public-private partnership is great, but just like having, an administrative agency is great, but it's great when it first starts. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until next thing you know, it's out of control. And how do you stop it? And what we're seeing, not just in our country, but at a global scale, is we're not talking about individual countries anymore and what they, what's best for them. It's all about stakeholders. If you start noticing that word everywhere, stakeholders.
100%.
It's the private companies, it's the NGOs, it's the nonprofits, it's the governments. We all have a piece in this. It really is just a new form of socialism, where you don't exist for yourself. You exist as a stakeholder in some broader, bigger, ultimate good sense. And as we watch all this stuff keep playing out, you can go all the way, extreme, looking at the World Economic Forum and what they're talking about, but focusing more on this Project Birmingham and what it was about. Dirtying up Trump, sure, but bigger. It's not a crime because they're doing it with not just the blessing of our government, but hand in hand with the government. We can do this in order to present it to the Senate so that the Senate can pass new laws and regulations and change the way that we interact with each other as individuals, as companies, and as countries. So ultimately, it's all one big. It's a swamp, and that's why that term resonates with everyone. And the deep state and all that. But deep state again doesn't mean that everyone got together in a room and planned something out. It's so nebulous. It just grows. It's the Leviathan. That's how it works. And as it keeps getting further and further along, do you want accountability now? Hey, look what these guys did back in 2017, 2018. Yes, but bigger picture is what can we do from as Congress, as a legislative body, to say, no, this is not how we're going to move forward as a country. No, we're not going to have global engagement centers where we fund and push propaganda, not on our own people, no, just internationally. But then we also work with other stakeholders with our allies who will push propaganda back toward us. And so it's not us doing it, it's other stakeholders doing it. So you can't come back and pin it on us. And it's so deceitful and just disgusting how it works. But politics in and of itself is disgusting. I mean, I've been there for a few years in different places, and watched the sausage get made. And however much you want to say, I want politics to be clean, it's never going to be clean. So the only thing you can do is say, okay, how do we restrict the ability of politicians to do the things that they're doing these days? That goes back to the crony capitalism and corporatism. These big businesses push these things because they know that will get them favor with governments, which then turn around and do things because that gives them fundraising abilities with big businesses. And so they both get fat off each other, leaving us, as individuals, getting nothing. I realized I'm on a soapbox again, so I will step back down. But that's where I see more of this Project Birmingham, and I'm getting lots of likes for saying I'll step off my soapbox. But that's where I see most of it going, not necessarily to dirty up Trump per se, but to change the trajectory of what the people themselves can do and how we can affect change. We were not supposed to be able to elect Trump in 2016, and yet we did. And so they had to redouble, triple, quadruple their efforts to make sure that would never happen again.
Same with Brexit.
Same with Brexit. I think Brexit's the thing that freaked Christopher Steele out. It freaked everyone out, and that's when they realized, oh crap, we got to step up our efforts, and they did. We watched it throughout, the summer and fall of 2016, and they still couldn't stop it. And so that's when they, like I said, just went balls to the wall and have been pushing all this crap down our throats. How do we change it? It's tough to say. It's going to take Congress passing things. I don't think we're going to get anything judicially that would say you can't do this or you can't do that. It's going to have to be Congress that does things.
I think it'd be great to see Congress really step into Russiagate full force. And I want to jump in there. I got a couple DMs. Like, I don't know what they're really going to do. I mean, they certainly talked a good game where, they're talking about, going against the weaponization of the government. They're talking about, looking into Russiagate and, all these different scandals. And, there might be too many eggs in the basket where I really wish they would just focus on Russiagate and, all the different things that we've found over the last, couple of years and really look at it, because I always make this point every Spaces chat. John Durham's report is not going to have everything, and it's not going to be the end. Everybody wants it to be the end. It's not going to be the end, because it's just not going to have, if anything, it's going to be through the lens of John Durham. And, in so many ways, we're going to have questions. And if you're an honest person, you're going to want to hear it from these individuals that Durham heard it from too. So, I would like to see them call in, a Daniel Jones or a Mikey Dickerson or a Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman kind of did, he posted an article, he wrote an article himself and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know." Okay, we'll call him in. And let's, he knows names, right? Who did you speak to? What did they tell you they were going to do? Where are your emails? Give us all the emails. And that's something they can absolutely do. And just put this out there in the public, because this should be a major story. We know about this. We know about a global data collection program. We detailed that in a video I think a week ago. We know there are a lot of issues with the DNC hack attribution. We know it's some of the same researchers implicated in the Alpha Bank scandal. And here, more researchers implicated in the Alpha Bank scandal are now associated with this. And it's like, I want to hear from these guys. I don't want it all through the lens of John Durham. And I'm sure it's going to be a great report. It's going to have a lot of answers for a lot of different questions, but it's not going to have everything. So let's get those subpoenas out there. We only have 2 years before this next election. And, if they're going to raise objections, if they're going to fight the subpoenas, let's do it now. Let's have that fight now, and let's not get into a situation like 2018, I think it was, or even 2020, where, okay, I think it was the Senate, issued a bunch of subpoenas and then nothing happened, right? People just ignored them, they didn't have to do anything. And we still have some of the same questions. And I'd like to see them get going a little bit. I'm still giving them another week or so before I really, bring the hammer down in my public comments on them. Not that they care about what I think, but I'm going to be pretty critical if they're not going to look at Russiagate, because as important as everything else is, and I certainly think they merit inquiries, this is about, a group of people, a pretty large group of people that put our country in jeopardy. I mean, that's what they really did. They tried to overthrow a president. I don't think that's hyperbole at all, because it wasn't just about not getting him elected. It was about keeping him from ever being reelected. And, I think they were really pushing towards an impeachment. So obviously we had 3 years of nonstop coverage of this. I don't think it would hurt for these same organizations to do a few more months of coverage. I mean, we had all those months, and now you don't hear anything. You don't hear anybody talk about Project Birmingham and the connections that we just made over the last couple of days. You don't hear them reference to the global data collection program that MB&I detailed a week or two ago. And there's some other finds. There's some other things that we know about. So that's my soapbox. And Robin, if you want to jump in with a question, it's probably good for me to go off my soapbox.
Thanks, you guys. Hi.
Hi.
Wow. I just want to say I'm so grateful for you guys, because you bring a level of clarity to a lot of issues. And I've been listening to so many spaces this last week about different aspects of this whole thing. I feel like I need to go back and reread everything and re-listen to everything, because there's just a lot. And it feels like it's layers upon layers to me. I call it incestuous. When that CJR article came out by Girth, that kind of put a lot of things into context in sort of layman's terms again. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I mean, it felt like for once somebody had hit the nail on the head with some of this stuff. And yet, of course, everybody was, on the left was putting it down. Okay, and I come from the left. I'm not a right or left. I'm an independent, and I left in 2016 after voting Democrat for 40 years. So I am really keen on getting to the root of what happened in 2016, and it started in a primary with the DNC, and so I wanted to share that today I heard a bunch of, I think it was 2 or 3 FBI whistleblowers in one of these spaces. And I think I put it down in the bubble down below. And I noticed it was 7 hours. And I'm like, well, I didn't listen to all 7 hours. So I know. And then the guy just said something about to go in 3/4 of the way. But anyway, what I wanted to get at is, between Durham's investigation and the stuff that's coming out with Matt Taibbi's Twitter files and CJR's article, Jeff Gersh or Gerf, I don't know, I'm probably messing up his name. I think the momentum is climbing. People are starting to talk about this more and more and asking questions and connecting the dots. And that's what this room was about today earlier that I listened to. They were connecting all kinds of dots, and people were just like light bulbs going on in their heads in there, So then there's different threads people are putting out, and you guys are putting that out. And I put something out from you, Undead, about, because I started looking at Reid Hoffman, because he came up in the 2020 primaries in the DNC. He was nefarious then. He had this app that he put out, and there was our Iowa caucus was all screwed up because of him. And he was involved in that. He was involved in that, and he was involved in Stacey Abrams' fair fight campaign crap. So he's not a good guy. He's got bad vibes from both sides, I think. I don't know. I'm just going to have to reread all of that stuff. But I did find that your article that you'd put out on Mickey, whatever the guy's name was, sorry, I'm getting them all mixed up. I just wanted to bring it to you guys that keep at it, because I think, when Durham comes out with his report, if he is, I kind of feel like maybe he's being held on to because there's more things that have come out, especially with the Hunter Biden laptop stuff too, even. Maybe that's all involved. I think they're all kind of layered onto each other, and there's so many of the same players across the board. It's just amazing when you start listening. And I mean, I feel like I need a whiteboard here. You know what I mean? I do, because I feel like I keep hearing these same names, and they're all, like you were saying earlier, they're all in these different aspects of this stuff. So anyway, I don't know if I made any sense. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that there's a few things that I've posted, and I think I put your article or your Substack, I think it was your Substack article in the bubble as well. All right, that's enough for me.
Yeah,
what keeps me up at night is that we're still 5 years behind. Like, we're looking at stuff from 2017 still, and especially with the tech stuff. How much is it advanced? We're so far behind, and until some progress gets made where some of these people start answering some serious questions, we're not going to know. I mean, we have a group here that is acknowledged, that is proven to have run a false flag operation on an American politician on purpose, and we know that group is involved in a lot of other things. And so we know that there are people who do that, and that they've never been questioned. They've never been put under oath, as far as we know. That's nuts. I mean, all the different aspects of Spygate we still have questions about. And this is one where there's people that could give us some answers, and that hasn't happened yet.
I think you're spot on, MB. And this is where the Democrats really have a leg up on the Republicans. They have an element of pageantry where even if there's no substance to allegations that they're looking into, the way they spin it, and they'll do primetime hearings, and they'll push out all these narratives, and they have all these different layers of how they're going to attack different things. And you know what? We have the substance on our side. We have justification for asking the questions we want to ask. I would love to see the Republican Congress bring in some of these guys, do a primetime hearing, put them on the spot, 8 o'clock at night, and just start asking questions. And you know what? If they want to take the fifth, leave them up there. Make them take the fifth all night long. I'd be fine with that. It's not a courtroom where they have to worry about what the influencing a jury or anything like that. I don't care. Leave them up there. Let them take the fifth. Or better, have them answer the questions. Why is Daniel Jones funding this false flag operation? Why is there so much wrong with the Alpha Bank allegations and sort of his investigation of that? And let's put all the information out there. Let's get all the reports, put it all out there. And as far as classification goes, I don't even as far as the Republicans go, they made this big deal about they're going to be like the church committee. That's what we heard about for weeks. They want to be like the church committee. Well, the church committee exercised unilateral declassification authority. They didn't listen to the executive branch. The executive branch, the president said, no, we want to keep this classified. And the church committee said, no, we're going to put this out there anyway. And they unilaterally declassified it. And this Republican Congress, this subcommittee, they can certainly do that if they choose to, or they can read it into the record, and they're protected in doing that. And there's so much that's wrong here. Give it to us. I mean, I think this corner has certainly proven ourselves and proven our ability to piece together some pretty important information from documents that get released. So give us the HPSI report on the ICA. Give us some of these other transcripts that are in there, and read in the CrowdStrike reports into the record. Whatever it takes to get the information out in the public, and whether it's us or whether it's another group, we'll start connecting the dots. I mean, you don't even have to engage all your staffers in this big long investigation by that point, because we'll do it for free. We enjoy doing this kind of stuff. So give us the tools, and we'll put them together.
I remember when now the name went out of my brain. The guy that's from Kentucky, the Massey. I remember him being in one of the rooms, and he was, acting like he was going to come back to some of these rooms because he was gaining information from, I don't know if it was your guys's one or who I was listening to at the time, but I feel like we should start inviting those guys that are on that committee, and Matt Taibbi, and give him some of the search terms you need, and just start involving the people that are actually digging in, or like Massey is the guy that's going to be on that committee. He's going to have to ask the questions, right, and get the subpoenas out. It just feels like there's just so much information out here, and they aren't accessing it because I'm sure they don't have time to sit and listen for 5 hours or 2 hours to these spaces. But there's a lot of good wealth of information here, and it feels like, I want the people that could do something about this to have their lights go on and go, wait a minute, look at this. You know what I mean? Can they be this stupid that they don't see all this stuff? I mean, seriously, maybe they're just too busy. I don't know.
Well, I think that you make great points, and I want to go back real quick to, you brought up the CJR article or series of articles, which I think kind of addresses a little bit about what you're talking about, and as Undead said, the Dems have the pageantry where we have the substance, but, our substance is, a lot of it is just in my head. A lot of it is in Undead's head, and a lot of it's in MP's head. And we'll talk about it in DMs or on spaces like this, and they can go 5 hours. How is someone supposed to distill all of that? And when those CJR articles came out, and I read through them, and I don't think maybe one or two little small things, but I don't think I learned anything actually new or explosive. But I thought it was great as a distilled narrative of what happened and how the media ran with this whole, Steele dossier crap, and how it snowballed. And I was talking to some different folks. I said, this is what I can send to someone who's not involved, who hasn't followed it like we have, who hasn't, read all the Twitter threads and listened to all the spaces and interviews. This is something I can send to someone and say, take 20 minutes out of your day or 45 minutes out of your day if you really want to read it slowly, and read this, and you will get so much more than me trying to say, okay, now read this New York Times article over here and read this BuzzFeed article over here. And then if you read this Twitter thread here, and then go listen to this Spaces for 5 hours, and then come to me with questions, you might slowly start to figure things out. It's being able to package things into that narrative form and show this is what you need to know. This is the top of the line, the big picture, the 30,000 foot view of what's happening or what's happened before. And that way you can get people to really start understanding what's happening. And I think that's what, I'm just spitballing here right now. Even the Durham report, we're going to get so much information from that, and it could be 500 pages. And most of the public is not going to read it. They're going to listen to what Sean Hannity has to say about it, or what Rachel Maddow has to say about it, or someone in between. What needs to happen is little cliff note versions of reports or the stories, or the Project Birmingham. Just being able to compile it all with citations and say, here's a 10-page overview, as opposed to this sprawling web of links and sources. And so I think that's something that our side, or the church committee, maybe even people in the corner can devote some time to. I don't want to promise anything that no one can produce, but I think that's kind of where our focus needs to start being, is how do we distill this into something that can be passed on to a layperson and at least get them the basics simply, easily, and quickly.
See, I think that's an impossible challenge, because whether it's Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity or somebody in between, I don't trust anybody to get the story right. I don't think they have the background. They haven't shown that they're doing the research now to where they're going to be able to read the Durham report and make the connections that you or I or NB or anybody else in our corner is going to be able to make. So I think they're going to be so far behind. I think you're looking at a period of weeks, really, before they could get to the point that they could actually report on it responsibly. So I think that's where the church committee could sort of come in and sort of act as a media entity, in that they could, instead of doing 2-minute questioning rounds, appoint one or two representatives of the church committee that are really engaged in this and really know it, to pose all the questions. And then 8 p.m. every night, 1 week maybe you're going to do a DNC hack, so you line up all your witnesses, and the entire week you're just going through for maybe an hour and a half, 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. You just have these witnesses up there. You open up with a 10-minute overview of what you're talking about and why, and then go through your questions with your witnesses. And maybe you don't even give the Democrats a chance to ask questions. I mean, we saw enough of that with the January 6th committee. If you don't have the people asking questions that you want, then you don't let them ask questions. And we can be a little bit more like the Democrats like that. But between 8 and 9:30 p.m., just have your witness up there, have two witnesses, and you can run through those questions in an hour and a half pretty easily. And that way, it's on C-SPAN. And more and more people don't trust. They don't go to CNN, they don't go to MSNBC or Fox News. if there's a hearing out there, it's going to be pushed out on Twitter. It's going to be pushed out. It's going to be covered. People are curious about this stuff, and they're going to want to hear this. And hopefully, you would think like Fox News or somebody would cover it, but you're talking about millions and millions of people hearing stuff they've never heard before, and you don't even need to wait for John Durham. I mean, I think it'd be great for them to do the hearings now. I mean, start getting the witnesses up there, start doing the interviews. Find out which ones you want to put in a primetime spot. Maybe there's others you want to keep behind closed doors, and start going through that. And then you know what? When the John Durham report comes out, that's your big that's your big climax, right? That way you can take all the information out there. You can bring in John Durham, interview him, ask your questions and everything. And that way you're disseminating the information responsibly, to millions and millions of people. And, you're just not going to get that without. That's the only way that I see this country finds out what happened in Russiagate. We're talking about events 7 years ago because the media is just not going to do it. The left-wing media is going to say, no criminal charges. That's going to be the headline. That's all they're going to talk about. And then they're going to talk about whether John Durham, was on a witch hunt or whether, they need to investigate John Durham and go after his law license. That's what they're going to be talking about on most outlets. And then on the right-wing side, they're going to say, this is so bad, how can John Durham not have brought criminal charges? That's going to be the discussion. And the meat of the report and all the important findings are going to go by the wayside. And they're not going to talk about the right topics, and they're not going to pose the right questions. So that's me on my soapbox again, but I put a lot on the Republican Congress to really step into a role where they're doing oversight over what the government did, over what some of these contractors did, but they're also doing a public service, and they're pushing this out there and getting more eyes and more information directly to people. That was a lot. Does anybody else have questions or they want to step in with something?
Come on, you guys. I know you have some.
Well, that's all right. We can go ahead and end it here. I mean, like I said, MB and I, we did a video on this stuff on Rumble on YouTube a few days ago, but we felt like doing this on Twitter as a Spaces chat would present an opportunity if people did have questions, wanted to be available and a little bit more engaged with that. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here, guys. Hope everybody has a good week, and we will see you next time.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.